Okay, six ikitami xistsiko. Nistuwa ko kutakho kito. Ki andok xistsiko. Kidako tesk namato. Wow. Family. So, okay. My name is Kolton, and I'm going to teach you about family today. So let me share my screen. Family. So in this lesson, we're going to cover family by a conversation. And then from that, I will also show some grammar points to help you in general Blackfoot. So first with our conversation. Papi speaks my family. This will be a conversation between Makanita and Zoe. So first, you could follow along as I move my cursor. Makanita. Okay. Sanista kinna. Zoe. Okay. Ninna anista bi dan. Makanita. Geek exist. Zoe. Anexista. Anista. Onokaki. Makanita. Matsksunoao. Zoe. Kresksunoao ninna. Aya. Makanita. Nitsksunoao. Kitikso koammo. Zoe. Takanistikso koamma. Makanita. Nitkoyemma. Nistuannikok. Otoxistim. Zoe. Hanya. So that was a conversation. I'll go over it in English. So Makanita. First she says, and Makanita is a woman and Zoe is a man. So Makanita says, okay, Tanstakin, which means hello. What's your father's name? Who's your dad? Essentially. Tanista is how we ask what's their name. And then Ginna is your father. So what's his name, your father, essentially. So he says, okay. Ninanista beat dana. So okay, hello. My father, Ninanista, name, or he's called beat Dan, which can translate to Eagle Chief, which is kind of a little bit of a common name down here. And then Makanita says, geek exist, which means kind of, what about your mother? Exist, your mother. Nixista, my mother. Anista, Bonokaki. So my mother's name is Bonokaki, which is elk woman. And then Makanita says, Matsunoa, which means I don't know her. And then Zoe says, Gideskshnoa nin. Gideskshnoa means do you know? And then nin. So think about what he's asking. Gideskshnoa nin. Well, since we know ninna means my father, or can mean my father, he's asking, do you know my father? Gideskshnoa nin. Then Makanita says, Nitskshnoa Gidiksu goam. Which means, yes, I know him. Nitskshnoa, I know him. Gidiksu goam. I'm related to you. Iksukoam means to be related to. And then Zoe says, Tsakans tiksukoamma. How are you related to him? He's asking. So far, Makanita is saying that she knows his father. Thus, she's related to Zoe. And Zoe's wondering how she's related to his father. She tells him, Nitkoyemma. Kind of, it's hard to translate to English, but you could think of it as I took him in as a son. And then nistoannagok means I am. That's one way to see I am. Nistoannagok. It's similar to my introduction when I said nistuakok. Otakokitope. I am otakokitope. I could have also said nistoannagok otakokitope, but either way, she said I am otoksistim. Which you could kind of translate to mean his adopted mother. Then so he says, Hanya, which means hanya is a very interesting word. It's a word that we use all the time in Blackfoot. So we could use it to mean like saying I agree, to say that's right, or even is that right? Is that so? Or you could use it as a question or statement. You could say, oh, hanya, as a question, is that right? As kind of a genuine question, even a sarcastic one. Or you could use hanya to mean that's right, to show your to display really your agreement, your approval. But hanya, what it literally means is there it is. Hanya, there it is. And so now let's go over some grammar points. So one thing that came up with in our conversation is some conjugations. Kitsiksukoammo and kitsiksukoamma are two conjugations that we saw. Kitsiksukoammo means I'm related to you, because from the verb iksukoam means to be related to. So kitsiksukoammo, when we end it with the O, we're saying I'm related to you. Kitsiksukoamma is saying you are related to him or her. So when you end it with an a, you're saying that it's that the verb is acting on either him or her, or just a third person essentially. And so the way that this kind of works, we add git, which means you, and then o, which is saying that I, the first person, am acting on you, the second person. And so when we want to use a conjugation to say that I'm acting on you, or I guess in technical terms, the first person is acting on the second person, we start it with get and we end it with o, and then we have our verb and our adverbs and whatever else, or I guess just verb and adverb in the middle, if there's an adverb, but yeah, you add your verb in the middle. So let's take a verb like akomim, which means to love inanimate thing, more specifically. Akomim means to love. So if you wanted to say I love you, you could say kitakomim, kitakomim. And so that's where it comes from. Kitsu. And then sorry, got ahead of myself. And then the other conjugation, kitsiksukoamma, we still use get, but we change it to a. And so when we want to say you are acting on her or him, or essentially saying the second person is acting on the third person, we start with get, add our verb, and end it with wa. And it's not a strong wa. A lot of this times this W gets kind of thrown out. It's more like a wa. So for instance, if we take the same verb, akomim, to mean love, you could put it all together, get akomim wa. But when you put it together, kitakomimma, kitakomimma. The reason that we don't pronounce this wa or this W is because really just because it would sound funny to say kitakomimma, kitakomimma. And so we cut it out and just get kitakomimma. And so really the rule with that is if it comes after a consonant, like an M, we cut out the W. But if it if this verb were to end, as in this last sound, end with a vowel, then we keep the W. But of course there are inconsistencies. So really, as you kind of go along, you don't really rely on rules, you just kind of rely on how it sounds. So a lot of things changed just to sound better, just to flow. And so the next grammar point that we have is possession. And so now I'm going to teach you about how we can show possession in Blackfeet and how we can show, yeah, ownership. And so one way with the first person, actually there's two ways. We could either start it with just an N and then your noun with kind of a phantom A, notokan, noto, and also a phantom I. We use the I a lot, but if there's a word where the first sound is going to be overpowering or just kind of needs to be there, then it's going to take over. So we wouldn't say nioto because otokan means head. We wouldn't say niotokan. And we wouldn't want to replace the O because nitokan sounds strange. So we say notokan. And if you notice, I'm kind of adding a silent A at the end. Notokan. Notokan. You might have to really listen, but it's there. Notokan. But since it's so faint, that's why I don't really write it. Nobody really writes it. No, because you're not saying notokana. You're saying notokan. And a lot of people even just omit that sound and say notokan. The other way of showing possession, you start with nit, add your noun, and end it with m to say my. So for instance, nitomitam, nitomitam, my dog. Omita means dog. Omita. Or it's one way to say dog, the other way is imita. But in this instance, we'd say omita. And we'd get nitomitam. The other way, with your, it's basically the same. As you could see, it's the same, except we're adding a ga instead of an n. So the same thing, gotokan, gotokan, your head, instead of notokan, which would be my head. And then same thing here, get, noun, and then m to say your. Gitumitam, gitumitam, instead of nitumitam. Gitumitam, your dog. And yeah. And these are just two different ways that you could use either or. They're rather interchangeable. But there are some instances where they can change the meaning, but most of the time they don't. And then with possession of the third person, it's pretty much the same again, but we started with an M, or the M is optional. But instead of ending with a silent A, we ended with the silent E. E. So we could say motokan, motokan. Notice I'm not saying motokana. I'm saying motokani, motokani. And the M is optional, so you could also say otokan, otokan. Either or, motokan or otokan. There's not, to my knowledge, really any nuances between motokan and otokan. And then the same thing for the second way to show possession, ot, and then m. So otomitam, otomitam, otomitam. And so really, the only difference between these two ways, you might be wondering, I apologize, I didn't really explain any nuances. It really just depends on the verb that you're trying to express possession over. I mean, not the verb, the noun. So for instance, otokan, the root for head, it ends with a consonant. So we'd want to say notokan because it'd be very strange to kind of say nitotokan, nitotokanim. Actually, we could, but we'd have to replace the N with an M, nitotokam. You could say that, but it sounds very unnatural. I've never heard it. And so since it ends with a consonant, we're going to kind of go to say notokan. And then same thing with omita. Since it ends with a vowel, an ah sound, it just sounds a little bit better to add this M to say nitumitam, nitumitam. You could say numita, but again, that's not really anything I've ever heard. And it might catch some speakers kind of off guard since numita is not really a phrase that we use. Or it's not really the conjugation that we use for possession. But yeah, generally if it ends with a consonant like N, we want to kind of just add an N or a K or an M. But if it ends with kind of an ah or any vowel, then it kind of makes more sense to use M. But yeah. However, it does differ with family. Like I said, there's not really much difference if you kind of add these. Actually, there is one thing that I will add before I can move on from this. With this kind of second conjugation that we see, this M is very necessary. It's very important that you use it. Because if you don't, then you're not displaying that possession. If you just say nitomita, it could be mistaken to be, it's more so you're saying I am a dog. Nitomita, I am a dog, versus nitomita, my dog. Or kitomita is more so saying you're a dog. And otomita is saying he is a dog. And so you need that M to show the possession for the second form. Yeah, for instance, there's another word, aki. Aki means woman, but when you add possession to it, it's saying your female relatives. More so, more specifically, like your sisters. So if I said nita akim, I'm saying my sister, essentially. It's one way to say my sister. Nita akim, my female relative. But if I said nita aki without the M, then I'd be saying I'm a woman. And so that's kind of a mistake that you kind of want to avoid is with the possession. But anyway, the two forms of possession that I've just showed you, they differ when it comes from family. So the first form, as in when you start it with, for instance, an N and end it with an A, or K with an A, or M with an I, it's the most common way to talk about your family. So if we add ninna, that's how we'd say my father, that's a conjugation for a father. And so the first conjugation, ni, with the A at the end, is saying that it's your relative, it's your blood relative. Ninna, my father. You know, we add ni and a, and then in the middle, the root for father is on. So ninna. However, if we use the second form, which is nit, the noun, and then m, it's a little bit different. It doesn't necessarily mean your relative. It's more so talking about an adoptive relative. So if you said nitsinnam, which is using the other form, the second form, the second form of possession, you're saying it's your adopted father more so, nitsinnam. So what does that mean? It doesn't necessarily mean that you were adopted. If you were adopted by somebody, you'd still call them ninna. Like if a man adopted you, you still call him ninna. Nitsinnam more so means it's kind of more so somebody that took you in, and or you took them in as a father. It's more so that you're looking up to them as like a male role model. Nitsinnam. It's just kind of like not necessarily biologically or familially related. It's more of like kind of a paternal relation without the genetics. So yeah, it's kind of hard to explain. You could describe Nitsinam. You could use Nitsinam to describe your uncle or just anybody that you've kind of taken in as an emotional father, essentially. Another way that it can be used strangely is to say your boss or your leader, Nitsinnam, because Ninna is a very funny word. It can mean my father, but Ninna also means a man. It could mean a chief, a leader, a warrior. So Nitsinnam. It's kind of a strange word. But yeah, we'd use that with anything. So for instance, Nixista means my mother, as in like your actual mother. But if you said Nitsixistam with the second one, Nitsixistam, you're saying your adopted mother, as in a person that you've kind of just grown an emotional attachment to. And then that's where we see it in the conversation. When she knows his father, she says, Nitkoyimma. I took him in as a son, essentially. So ochkoy is what does it say? It's ochko is son. And so she said Nitkoyimma. So she's kind of saying he's my adopted son. He's my emotional son. So she looks as him, she kind of regards him as a son, treats him like a son. But he's not technically her son. She didn't give birth to him. And so that's the cultural point. Oh no, sorry, got ahead of myself. So the cultural points within our story, it's pretty common, it's very common to ask the names of parents to a younger person from an older person. So many old people, many elders might ask you, if you're a younger person, not necessarily young, but younger than them, who your parents are, who your family is, because they might know them. And we saw that in our conversation, that woman ended up knowing who his family was. And so that's kind of a main reason that the elders, the elders ask younger people who their family is. And then adoptive, I've used adoptive a lot. Like I said, it's not a genetic relation, it's more so an emotional relation. And so that's kind of how we act a lot in Blackfoot cultures. We have a lot of people that we've kind of grow close to, but didn't necessarily give birth to us or are biologically related to us, but you're still really close to them. And so we still use these family terms to describe them, but we use a separate term just to kind of give that nuance that they're not really genetically related to you, but you still have an emotional attachment to them. And so, Genye, that's the end of my lesson. Wow. See you all later.